Welcome to another episode of Live from the Blue Seats. I'm your host, Rob, joined this week by Dave as well as Nick. We may have JL a little bit later, who is currently producing remotely from an undisclosed location. On this week's show,
what is he, a witness protection?
Well, I don't want to, we don't need to get into details right now.
I know.
Maybe later when he joins the show, if he joins the show. I was going to say on this week's show, it's, I'm sure collectively our least favorite type of episode. It is a New York Rangers postmortem end of season wrap-up show about a team that fell short of the ultimate goal. We've been doing this podcast, on and off for the last 4 seasons, or it started in the 1920 season. And of course, in each of those seasons, the Rangers have failed to win the Stanley Cup. Obviously, it's not all bad stuff, but I think the prevailing emotions coming off of this 6-game loss to the Florida Panthers in the Eastern Conference Final are certainly more negative than positive, but we are going to talk about it all on this week's show. We'll obviously answer some questions a little bit later on. Dave, Nick, let's just jump right into it. Whoever wants to go first, but let's start with kind of the overarching evaluative question here. So whoever wants to take this first, how do you feel? How would you evaluate this Rangers season? And was it a success?
Nick, you go first.
All right. Thank you, Dave. Oh boy, I feel like that's a loaded question, but honestly, for me, and I'm gonna hate sounding like a Yankee fan with George Steinbrenner, but this season for me was a failure. It was, the whole basis going back to last year, firing Gerard Gallant, everything that Chris Drury did, all the moves that were made, it was cup or bust. This is where we were at. We were no longer satisfied just making the playoffs. 2 years ago, we make the conference final. Last year, we take a huge step back against the Devils. So the hiring of Peter Laviolette and not to go with a younger, unproven head coach like a Chris Knobloch in the NHL, it was signaling all hands are on deck. Rangers are going all in to win a Stanley Cup. So from that standpoint, this season for me was pretty much an unmitigated failure, especially with the way that it ended.
So if you had asked me this question before the exit interviews, I would have said it was a half success with a disappointing end, because I would have said the Adam Fox injury played a major role. And it was too little too late with the way Laviolette adjusted to the Panthers. Game 6 was the best the Rangers looked that entire series. And it's because it's not a coincidence that they looked their best when Hedl was back at center, but I digress. Now, after the exit interviews, and we're learning shit about how they managed the trade deadline again by not putting guys who are hurt on long-term injured reserve and pulling a Vegas and just loading up. I think I'm with Nick. I think I have to say it's a failure. They did not learn from their mistakes the last 2 years. Specifically last year. They didn't put Lindgren on long-term injured reserve last year. They lost all momentum because they had to do cap gymnastics and jump through 17 hoops to get Patrick Kane. And we saw how that wound up. This year, we find out Jacob Trouba broke his ankle. He was magically back after 2.5 weeks, which great. Yeah, it healed. He got cleared. I understand the medical part of it. But you're telling me that he wasn't in pain and it didn't impact him? He looked like shit down the stretch. He looked like shit in the playoffs. You're telling me they couldn't long-term injured reserve him, give him another 2.5 weeks off? Maybe even the first round against Washington, which is a far inferior opponent. You got Chad Ruedel. He's your stay-at-home defenseman. They went 12-2 without Trouba down the stretch anyway. You could have had $8 million in cap space to work with. And then, hey, you had enough to potentially, if you weren't happy with Kakko, you didn't think you had enough offense, trade him for something a little bit more fitting of what they needed, more scoring, a little bit heavier. But no, they did the same fucking thing. They didn't put him on long-term injury reserve. They didn't have the cap space. They did half measures with Jack Roslovic, and I am fine with the way Roslovic played for our 4th-round pick. People expecting him to be a savior were a little bit delusional, but they didn't learn their fucking lesson. How do you not? You do this 2 years in a row. How do you do this again?
Yeah, really a lot there, and I agree with both of you. So here's what I'll say about this: is that at the beginning of the year, I predicted them, and my now on hiatus Twitter feed, but I do have a little thread that I pin to the top of my feed of my predictions for the season, and then at the end of the year, I go back and evaluate them. I picked them to lose in the second round to Carolina. So I'll say, hand up, they exceeded my expectations in that regard. Now, that said, in the context of the season, especially the way the season started, and I think that that's so important here because it all comes back full circle. Laviolette did such an amazing job with this team from the jump and getting them to sort of buy in, play with a certain amount of togetherness, play with this very business-like approach. Look, the Rangers had some duds here or there, right? They were clearly adjusting to the system at times earlier in the year, and they had this penchant for getting blown out, so that kind of hurt their goal differential long term. Where they play 4 great games and then they lose 7-1, then they play 4 great games and then they lose 6-2. So it kind of undid all the 4 games before it from a goal differential perspective. That's why I think that stat looked kind of ordinary. But they were also a very good 5-on-5 team the first 2 months of the year. And slowly but surely that dissipated as the year went on. And I don't know if that was the injuries. I don't know if that was adjustments that teams made to their style, particularly the 1-3-1, which was much more effective earlier in the year than it was later in the year. I don't know if it was maybe just them falling back into bad habits because that's been the identity of the franchise for so long, right? You lean on your goalie and your power play, and you don't really worry about the 5-on-5 play. But in the end, guys, for me, that's what bites them in the ass. And if you look at the stats, and I don't want to be that guy because there's plenty of examples this year, right? The Flyers were a 53% expected goal share team. They were horrible and didn't miss the playoffs. The Kings barely made it. They had a 54% expected goal share. It's not all that, but the Florida Panthers, I think, are right around a 53% expected goal share. The Edmonton Oilers also were 3rd in the league. They had a 57% expected goal share. So you're talking about, again, 2 of the top, 6 teams in terms of expected goal share are the ones in the Stanley Cup Finals. Sorry, the Oilers led the league. I'm sorry, I had the page on Natural Stat Trick wrong. I'm looking at it now. This is 5-on-5 over the course of 82. The Oilers were the best team. The Panthers were the 5th best team. The only teams ahead of them were the Kings, Stars, and Hurricanes. Those are your top 5. The Rangers were all the way down in the middle of the pack at 49.6, right? So they were about break even. This to me was just another piece of evidence that if they're not seriously taking steps towards becoming a better 5-on-5 team, then this is their ceiling. Their ceiling is the Eastern Conference Final, and they will get beat by a better opponent at that stage. We saw it happen in 2015 versus Tampa. We saw it happen in 2022 versus Tampa, and those series were very similar in a lot of respects, even though the 22 team was a little bit more of an upstart. The 15 team obviously had a lot higher expectations. Speaking of that, and here's how I'll put a bow on my kind of opening salvo here. I find it very funny, not haha funny, more like Joker, I'm going crazy funny, that we all convinced ourselves this year that we were living in a redo of 1994 and we were headed for glory, when in fact we were living in a redo of 2015. We had a really good team that probably should have made a Stanley Cup final, won a President's Trophy, but fell short and lost to a team from Florida and was roundly outplayed by that team from Florida. So makes me sick to my stomach because I have, for all the good that happened in 2015, with the President's Trophy, and that was a really fun year and a great team. That's the season from that era that I look back on the least fondly. And I have a feeling I'm going to look at 2024 in a very similar way once we get some distance from it. I also have major questions around the Trouba injury, so let's get to that. Nick, what are your thoughts on that? Are you as angry as the rest of the fan base? Because that's the main emotion that I get from everybody once they learned about the Trouba injury and how that was all handled.
Oh, I'm beyond pissed off about that whole thing. I definitely just want to clarify. I'm not pissed off at Jacob Trouba because one thing about athletes, especially pro athletes, they will play until you pull them off the ice, the field, the court. It doesn't matter. Athletes are always going to want to play, and it's the job of coaches, it's the job of the coaching staff to protect athletes from themselves. I mean, I can say myself, like when I was younger, I had a concussion and a broken nose. I didn't tell anybody, and I kept playing because I just wanted to finish the game. I didn't want to let my teammates down. I didn't want to let my coach down. So it's just, if you're an athlete at any level, you have that in you innately, I think. So I'm definitely not mad at Truba, but this is, and correct me if I'm wrong. I feel like when the Rangers let go of Ramsey, nobody ever came out and said exactly why. There was always a little bit of rumors around the reason. But if I remember correctly, I remember seeing or hearing someone say it had to do with Ranger players, most notably Ryan Lindgren, playing through injuries when they shouldn't have been out there. And I just look at it, Dave said it yesterday on Twitter. Broken ankles don't heal in 12 days. And I can attest to that. I had a broken ankle, and it literally took me a month. And actually, to be totally fair, when I got back out there, I wasn't really myself again until about 6 weeks since breaking it. So the fact that the ankle injury was that gruesome for Truba, well, and the excuse of, well, he could walk on it, okay, that's fine. But when you saw how impaired he was, because I mean, look, Truba's not the greatest defenseman in the world, but where he was in the postseason definitely is not him as a player. So the fact that the Rangers could honestly send him out there, knowing the injury that he suffered, it's 100% malpractice on the organization. And the fact that they didn't learn from their lesson last year with Lindgren and LTIR Truba, if for nothing else, like Dave said, you go full Vegas and load up. I mean, had they put Truba on LTIR, maybe we could have got Tomas Herbold. That would have been nice. I wouldn't have been mad. So
yeah, he would have been a better fit here than in Vegas too, because it didn't really work in Vegas, at least in the short stint that he played. Yeah.
So I just look at it absolutely malpractice by the New York Rangers and everyone within the organization.
Can you guys hear me? Because my headset died and I had to go get another one.
Oh, yes, yeah, sir. We can hear you.
All right, good. So that was fun. So I caught the last bit. I'm not sure, Nick, if you covered this. Isn't the way they handled Lindgren last year why Jim Ramsey got fired? So
that's the rumor.
That's the rumor. Yes, you're right. That's the rumor. And if that's true, are they going to fire the training staff again this time around? Are they going to fire Ryan Martin, who handles the cap space on the Rangers, the assistant GM? Because
I'll tell you,
2 years in a row.
It's 100% justifiable, in my opinion.
I mean, let's be real. They're not going to, but it's problematic that they made the same mistake twice.
Yeah. So, yeah, Dave, so anything else from you on the Trouba injury? Because otherwise I was going to just kind of talk a little bit more about, and we can get into some of the decisions that need to be made with personnel. But do you have anything to add on the injury situation itself and the way it was handled?
No, I am a little bit surprised that Adam Fox didn't need surgery because that looked brutal. But
yeah,
everything else, like Ryan Lindgren playing through cracked rib, whatever. That's a pain tolerance thing. Fox's knee, we all knew was a problem. I mean, this stuff doesn't surprise anybody come playoffs. But I think my major gripe is how they handled it in the deadline. If he broke his ankle in the playoffs and still played on it, we'd have an entire different discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, and I don't know why he came back. Even let's put the cap stuff aside, right? Not that I think they shouldn't have taken advantage of every last dollar that they could have created cap space wise, but why did he even play like meaningless? I shouldn't say meaningless. They were trying to win the President's Trophy, and I appreciate that. I know a lot of people don't think it's valuable, but obviously you want home ice. It is a trophy. It is a banner. There will be a 23-24 regular season champions banner in the Garden. I know it's not the banner we want, but it still commemorates a very successful regular season. They wanted to win the President's Trophy, fine, but like he didn't need to play in the regular season. Like if the goal is to win the Stanley Cup, everything you do needs to be geared towards that. So if it's, yes, we want to win the President's Trophy, but we're going to have to do it with Chad Ruedel, then so be it. And by the way, like Chad Ruedel was a perfectly fine sixth defenseman for the Pittsburgh Penguins, who, while again, maybe a middling record, and by the way, a horrible power play for the first 3 quarters of the season until they finally figured it out late with Carlson. Another very good 5-on-5 team, right? And Chad Ruedel played on that team. So again, guys,
I like Chad Ruedel. I think he's a viable Gustafson replacement next year.
He also was on that. He was also on, I think, their second Cup team. I don't know if he was on the first of the back-to-back, but he was. I know he was
second team. Only the second team. Yeah, no, but this is exactly right. And he never played in the playoffs when the Rangers were struggling pretty mightily defensively. And I was going to say, I don't mean to sound like a broken record, and I'm sure this will come up more and more anyway, but like they have to be more focused on becoming better 5-on-5. And look, that does not mean you have to play like Carolina where you're just like Corsi merchants, right? You take a million shots, but they just got absolutely pounded by Florida in their own zone for 3 straight games, particularly, right? Games 3, 4, and 5. And that's really what turned the series. I actually think they played okay in game 2. I think they actually won the expected goals battle in game 2. They won the game in overtime. I thought they hung pretty well in game 2. But 3, 4, and 5 were a joke. And then to your point, Dave, they played pretty well in game 6. Look, I mean, everything Trouba related, injury related aside with Trouba, I should say, I think they have to seriously consider, and this is where we'll transition to just, overall personnel moves that we all think need to be made or what we think will happen here. But I just cannot see how you justify $8 million cap hit for that player now coming off an ankle injury. I know it's not a serious ankle injury. It's quote unquote healed, although I do not believe that it was healed. I think, Dave, you were talking off air before the show. Like that sounds more like damage control to me. I think it wasn't healed, and I think he was out there compromised. I can't see him on the team next year. And if he is, it has to be in a massively reduced role. Like he has to play 8 minutes a night at even strength and be on like the 3rd penalty kill unit or the 2nd penalty kill pair.
I disagree. I think he's going to be back. I think Lindgren's the one that's gone.
I think it's reversed. Yeah. I think Lindgren's the one that's staying in Trouba. They're going to find a way to offload Trouba.
They can't. No one's taking that contract, and they're not going to buy out their captain again.
I don't think they're
granted, I'm not counting Drury as a buyout, but
I don't think they're going to buy him out. I mean, he does have a 15-team no trade that kicks in on July 1st, so it goes from being an immovable contract to look. I mean, I think all Ranger fans, if we had to throw in a draft pick or maybe a prospect to get rid of him, as much as everybody hates him and can't stand him, trading him and losing a prospect in the transaction isn't necessarily the worst thing, considering there won't be a buyout on the books.
Well, and
if it
Arthur
cost them
Staple,
Matthew Robertson, fine. But if it cost them Brett Berard, then I'm going to be a little bit pissed off. You deal with the $8 million cap hit, play him in a third defenseman, third pairing role, and I'd rather avoid the doom that is Ryan Lindgren's next contract, which is going to be a Girardi contract. We know where this is going. We've seen it twice before.
All I'll say on the Trouba thing is that Arthur Staple, who, obviously is a longtime NHL reporter, does seem, and this is speculation, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but he believes there would be interest in Trouba. And I think that was kind of echoed in some of Larry Brooks' commentary as well. Like,
I'm happy to be wrong.
Maybe not at that cap hit, so you might have to eat some money, right? And what does that, but maybe that increases the return slightly, right? Rather than a 5th round pick, you get a 4th round pick. I don't know here. And again, like this is even more so than the Goodrow contract, which I think people overreacted to. And now, by the way, looks very movable. If you want to talk about another guy that you could potentially trade at his highest value. And I said all along that contract would be movable, and everybody laughed at me. That's why I'm off Twitter now, because I'm tired of that crap. The point is that if there might be a taker for that contract, but the Rangers painted themselves into this corner by giving him that contract in the first place. And what they did was this to me was by, let's be clear, by Jeff Gordon and John Davidson. This was a miscalculation of who Jacob Trouba is as a player, and his value, right? What they saw was a big right-handed defenseman that had 50 points one season. And they were like, oh, wow, well, there's obviously offensive upside, but because of his size, he's going to be a shutdown guy. And again, if you look at the way he profiled and the way he was used in Winnipeg, they didn't use him as a shutdown guy. Sure, he throws a big hit every now and then because he is a big dude who can time a hit. But he was almost deployed as their Eric Gustafson in Winnipeg. He was against, he was not against the other team's top competition. He was in an offensive role next to Morrissey when Morrissey was more of a stay-at-home guy. He's obviously become a little bit more offensive now in this stage of his career. But like this is what I'm saying. They paid him like he could be this two-way force, like he was going to be the next Chris Pronger. And he is not that. And I think they need to not only realize that now and cut their losses so that they can build a better 5-on-5 and a more competitive team that can win in this window, they also need to not make this mistake again. And I'm hopeful that Chris Drury, who was obviously part of the brain trust, but didn't make this ultimate decision, it was not on, he does not hold accountability in my mind for it. They need to learn to not hand out these contracts because it kind of goes hand in hand with the decisions they made with Girardi and Stahl, right? They had Anton Strawman sitting right there and they let him walk. And because they had signed Stahl to that contract and then they wanted to re-sign Girardi. They had to let Strawman go. They brought in Dan Boyle. Obviously that we know how that worked out. That Trouba's the big one, right? Trouba seems to be the linchpin and he to me seems the most likely core piece to go. But the other lightning rod, and let's talk about him for a couple minutes here, is Mika Zibanejad. Dave, you go first. Where do you fall on the Mika Zibanejad question? Because that's another one that's out there where I think a lot of this fan base would not be upset if the Rangers found a way to move him on.
I mean, are we talking practically or are we talking my personal feelings? Because practically he's not going anywhere. No one's taking that contract. He's got 1,000 years left at $8 million. No one's taking that contract.
Well, all right.
And he's got a full no move.
Do you think that, yes, he is a full no move. Do you think that he's good enough in his role as a top line center for them to win the Stanley Cup? I mean, it's as blunt as you can get as a question.
Is he good enough as a top line center? No. But, and I was, I'm not going to say that I always thought that he was not going to be a top line center because in that 3-year period before this year, he was excellent. That drop off is steep. But there's a role for him. I mean, Rob, you're the one that said it in the chat. Look at what Dallas did with Tyler Seguin.
Right.
Reduce his role. That's fine. I can deal with $8 million Mika Zibanejad, but he has to shave his head. I'm done with his long hair thing. It'll work for Panarin. It'll work for Mika. Shave your fucking head, Mika.
Nick, where are you on the Mika thing? Like, what is your overall assessment of him after this season?
I think he could still produce like a first line center, but he's not an elite first line center. I think there's that definite tier and that difference where you have guys who can play top line minutes, but then when you're looking for that difference maker, he's not your Anze Kopitar or Patrice Bergeron or Sasha Barkov. He's not that guy. He's not a Nathan McKinnon. He can give you, 85 to 90 points. Now, how he gets them is another story. So I definitely think there is something to dropping him down in the lineup. And I mean, look, the LA Kings won the 2014 Cup with Mike Richards on their fourth line. So don't tell me that it can't be done. If Mike Richards is your fourth line center, you're doing something pretty good down the middle. So I look at it, it can definitely be done, but the whole thing for me is there has to be a want. And for me, it comes back to this bromance between Kreider and Zibanejad. Are they going to be okay getting broken up? Because, whether or not they're okay with it, you have to do it. At some point, you just got to tell the players to shut up and go play. But we've seen how this team kind of just runs on vibes, and how much is it going to upset the locker room if the two BFFs aren't going to get to play together.
I mean, it's exactly where my head goes, Nick, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, and look, that whole the team is undoubtedly close knit, and they all talked about it in the on breakup day, and that's admirable, and it is necessary, right? To a certain extent. Although I'm sure there are plenty of examples of teams that didn't really get along that well, but they had a bunch of really good players that worked well together on the ice or whatever on the field, whatever sport you're talking about. I don't think, to your point, everybody needs to be best friends in order to win a Stanley Cup. Yeah, I mean, look, I'll just detail this here. I did sort of write it in my little end of season, thread, and we talked about it on the group chat and stuff. To me, what you have to do, you have to break them up, and I mean permanently. And you at least need to give it like half of next season. It needs a true sample size. You need to really figure it out with these guys apart. I would put Mika, who still grades out very well defensively, basically into Alex Wenberg's spot in the lineup. He becomes your, middle six center, right? Or whether it's 2C or 3C doesn't really matter to me because it's a difference of one or two shifts, right? A period, maybe one shift a period. And you play to his strengths. Mika himself said it in his interview. He said, look, if I'm not producing, I at least want to make sure the other line that I'm playing against doesn't score. And he did a pretty good job against Barkov in this series defensively. Now, look, were they in their end the whole time? Yeah, but it is what it is, right? He is still, like I said, he still grades out decently as a defensive center. I think the big question here is related to center depth is Filip Chytil's health, right? If Filip Chytil is healthy and he's back to himself after a full training camp, I don't see why you don't run him as your, and let's just be clear for the purposes of this conversation. Vincent Trocheck is the top center on this team. He centers the best line. That was the only line that had any prayer of creating chances and driving offense in the conference final. It was the only line that was above water in terms of expected goals, I think. So that line I'm not touching, right? So let's just call that the first line. I don't see why you don't have a second line of Kreider, Chytil, and a right wing to be determined. And then you have Zibanejad being, a guy who can still produce offense in theory, especially against weaker competition, as your third line shutdown center, right? This team's version of Anthony Cirelli, which to me, before when we were talking about the Rangers, like after 22, I remember this, Dave, we were really keyed in on, man, they need like their Philip Danault, right? Like they need their Anthony Cirelli. And now I'm thinking about it in terms of why can't Mika Zibanejad be that guy? I mean, look at Cirelli's scoring numbers. He puts up 45 points a year, right? Maybe 50 points. He's like a 25 goal, 25 assist guy. He's not asked to carry the load primarily offensively, but he obviously chips in. But he is also counted on to be the toughest guy to play against. And I just think that that's the route you have to go with Mika Zibanejad. I think the days of him and Kreider being stapled together and being the team's, nominal top line are over and have to be over. It's not working. It hasn't worked for years now, for multiple years. And like you said, Dave, they're stuck with Mika. And look, we're not that far removed. All of this is still very raw for all of us emotionally. But even with the emotions being what they are, and me being, angry enough to want guys gone, I don't want him gone. Guys like Mika Zibanejad don't grow on trees, but we have to be honest about what he is. And to Nick's point, he's not an elite center. So let's stop treating him like an elite center. Let's put him in that Cirelli tier, that Danault tier, and tell him, right, going into next year, your job is going to primarily be our shutdown guy. You're going to play on our second line, and we're going to use you as like a supercharged checking center. And I think the wingers that he ends up playing with are very important. I had no idea who those guys should be, but that's my idea for me. Well, I'd love to hear it.
So you're keeping that top line together, Trocheck, Panarin, Lapp. Then you got Chytil, Kreider, and let's say the Rangers don't make a single trade. Don't make any trades. Mm-hmm. You got Kreider, you got Chytil, you got Othman.
Mm-hmm.
You got, now this is where it's going to get a little iffy. You got Zibanejad, Kakko. Remember, no trades.
Cooley.
Kakko, and either Cooley or Berard.
Well, right.
Because
Do you want to lean
Berard,
into two rookies?
well, one of those two. Because remember, Berard led Hartford in 5-on-5 scoring, and he's a pest. He's an absolute pain in the ass to play against.
He'd fit right in
the fourth
Florida.
line, figure it out.
Well, yeah, that would be, probably Goodrow, or maybe they. Oh, right. This is a no trade scenario.
Yeah, no trade. So
Goodrow,
Rempe,
really good fourth line.
Yeah, Goodrow, Rempe, Brodzinski, somebody. You could
Really?
sign somebody. You could find another fourth line center. Maybe you re-sign Wenberg. Wenberg, Goodrow, Rempe / Brodzinski. That's a fine fourth line.
Yeah,
and the Rangers still only have 2 scoring lines, but at least that third line is defensive and can score.
That's not a bad idea. So wait, what was that third? That was Kakko. So Kakko's still here in that scenario?
Yeah, no trade. So Kakko's still here. You got Zibanejad, Kakko, and Berard or Cooley, and then one of them winds up on the fourth line with insert players here.
I love the idea of Berard.
Pick your 3 favorites.
I love the idea of Berard, and also this is one name that's been thrown out a couple of times. But some friends I've talked to, if you're looking for like a Blake Wheeler replacement who might fit on a third line, James Van Riemsdyk, who still has very good 5-on-5 impact, very good. That. Very, very good 5-on-5 impacts.
Great in front of the net.
Yeah.
Yep. Plays
terrific
the game that they need.
Yep. And then he becomes net front on the second power play unit. And that's the other thing, guys. I'm also moving Zibanejad off the top unit, and I'm putting Lafreniere there. And that's an easy one. I'm putting Zibanejad on the second unit, maybe with like a JVR or somebody that they bring in to kind of augment the second power play. And you can maybe have a little bit more balance between the two units. But to me, Mika's role has to change. It's just you cannot keep forcing this thing where you treat him like a top. I mean, Dave, or Nick, I was going to say, it's one thing to say, yeah, he's not Bergeron, he's not Barkov, he's not any of those guys, he's not Kopitar. But I mean, he got absolutely destroyed by Nico Hischier last season in the playoffs too. So like, this is not a thing that is debatable to me anymore. Like, he is not that guy, and let's not pretend he's that guy. Let's not go into next season and be like, oh, well, if he has a good year. And he had 91 points last year, and he still got absolutely bossed by Nico Hischier in the Devils series. I'm not interested in him as my top line center anymore. I don't think the team can win a cup if he is.
Yeah, no, I mean, for me, it all starts and ends with 93 and 20. Like that's where a lot of this conversation lives and dies with me. I love Mika. I've loved Mika for years, but it's definitely, the proof is in the pudding. Guy's not a playoff. He's not a guy that will win you a cup. Like I look at Sam Bennett. Sam Bennett's not a guy who will get you to the playoffs, but he's a guy that gets you through the playoffs. I think the Rangers have too many guys that will get you to the playoffs, but won't get you through.
So one thing to remember, if the Rangers say swap Hedl and Zibanejad, now Hedel's getting the Hischiers and Hedel's getting the Barkovs. Zibanejad's going to get freed up. You never know what's going to happen there.
Yes.
That's
exactly.
Fair. I mean, a lot of this too is on the assumption that Hedl can stay healthy, which with this,
yeah, that's fair. With
this concussion, that he had, and then let's be real, I think we can stop calling it a suspected concussion. With this concussion, he's had multiple now, and now this one kept him out literally for 6 months. So we were at the point. I mean, I know I said it to you guys multiple times. At one point with Hedl, it was probably around New Year's, I started thinking like, oh God, this is Michael Sauer 2.0. So because we just hadn't heard anything. There was no progress, no nothing. So I mean, the next hit for Hedl really could be his last one. So the Rangers, that's the other, talk about walking a razor's edge for Chris Drury. I mean, what he does this summer, a lot of it depends on a couple of guys, and one of them has a really bad injury history. So it's a lot to really gamble on for a cup contender.
Well, that's very true. And I think what's interesting though to me is that, clearly Drury, when he gave Hedl that extension, which was mid-season last year, That was off the back of the Vinny Trocheck signing, and they had just locked up Zibanejad. So right there, you're like, wow, that's a lot of money invested in centers, but the Rangers are extremely strong down the middle. I mean, look, we just spent 10 minutes talking negatively mostly about Mika Zibanejad, but if you look at Zibanejad, Trocheck, Hedl, I mean, look, guys, we've said it before. Very few teams can match that depth. I think it's more about how you deploy that depth and the line combinations that you surround those centers with. And I do think they just need to add a piece or two that changes or augments the attitude of the team, right? I don't think the Rangers are a soft team. And I don't think that they got bullied in a nastiness sense by Florida. I think Florida just wore them down and outplayed them. They need to be able to push back a little bit more effectively against a team like Florida when they get into a playoff series like that. That's like true, ground and pound, to use a football term, hockey. I think it's going to be a fascinating offseason. I do think this team needs to change. I know the scenario we just ran, Dave, was kind of a no trade scenario, but you can't run it back. This is not a season where you look at it, you can't run it back, right? I mean, you just can't.
Yeah, I didn't want to go down that rabbit hole of, are we going to trade for Brady Tkachuk, which was a Conehead idea. I don't want to go down that route. I haven't had enough time to look at it. I don't know who the hell's available. We can just throw names at a wall and see what sticks. But I do agree they can't run it back.
Yeah. All right. So I think we want to get to the questions now, Dave, if you want to start pulling those up. Nick, any other thoughts do you have any other guys that stick out to you? To me, the big ones are Trouba and Mika. I think Gaudreau potentially could move. Lindgren is up.
Kakko's gonna be. I think Kakko is gonna get moved.
Yeah, Kakko's gone. And that to me is probably the saddest part when you look at this Ranger team, because remember 5 years ago we were all thrilled. We thought what we were getting in Kakko coming off that World Junior tournament, and then the World Championships. We were. I remember as a fan base, we were thrilled. We were like, okay, here's our game changer. This is a franchise cornerstone that we're going to be able to build around for the next 10 to 12 years. So to see where he's just absolutely fallen, and he's become a worse offensive version of Jesper Fast, it's really sad, especially for me. So I think a clean break for him and for us is what's best, as for both sides, just moving on.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I mean,
it sucks because
honestly,
he's useful on the ice.
Yeah, no, 100%. But it's you don't draft Jesper Fast second overall.
There's nothing you could have done. So sorry. I know this isn't what you meant, but there's going to be people that are going to be like, they should have drafted Stutzler or whatever. Shut the fuck up. I don't even know if Stutzler was in that draft. That's not you. It's just he was.
Oh yeah, no.
It's his number 2 pick. They didn't do anything wrong with it. It just sucks he didn't pan out. It was the wrong year to have the number 2 pick.
Yeah.
It sucks.
They weren't taking Kirby Dach. Everybody remembers.
Sorry.
Everybody remembers that draft was Jack Hughes or Capo Kakko, and whoever the Devils didn't pick, that's who we were getting, and we were just fine with either one. It wasn't like the year after where it was could the Rangers take Byfield and maybe Lafreniere, where there was a little bit more of a debate. But even then, Lafreniere was the consensus number 1 overall pick the next year. So it was I can't kill the organization for drafting them. I can kill certain coaches and how they handle them and develop them. Yes. But for the most part, it just sucks that a guy who that we were hoping was going to be, part of the future is going to be looking to call somewhere else home this year.
Yeah, and just to close on that, I was going to say, because this will come up as well, everyone's going to blame the Rangers development system for failing him. And sure, there's some blame there, but, at this point, Peter Laviolette in his postgame, or his end of season remarks, which I thought were great, by the way, overall, everything he said, I thought struck the right chord. And I really like Lavi. I think that's one of the positives that come out of this year.
Yes.
I think they've got 2 or 3 more really good years with him at the helm to try and win this thing. But he took responsibility for Kakko, but Kakko also took accountability himself. And I think there was kind of an acknowledgement, unspoken, of course, that it just might not be working here, right? Kakko was like, look, Lavi sat me down and said, you're going to get to play with Kreider and Zibanejad. That's the plan. We're going to let it happen. They played 11 games together at the beginning of the year. They scored 2 goals. They only allowed 1. So it's just so funny how it's worked out with like offense just does not happen with that kid on the ice. It's remarkable to your point, Nick, because he was such a dynamic offensive prospect. Sure, the large ice, right? That's going to be an adjustment, and his style of game translating to North America. But at this point, you'd think that type of talent would pop, and it just hasn't. It has not translated. Seems like his teammates have a tough time playing with him. I just don't think he's been able to figure out kind of like the timing and the speed of the NHL game, even though he's been playing it for 5 seasons now. So a clean break is probably best, but I do share your kind of sadness that it didn't work out for sure. All right, you got questions there, Dave?
Yep, I got a few questions. So we had to change it up this time around because despite the fact that this is a Blue Sea Blogs podcast, I do not have the login information for the Live from the Blue Seas Twitter account. I created the damn account, so I have no idea where it is. So I blame Rob and Becky for that one. So it came from my account this time around, which may have thrown some people off. Jessica _Lynn 312 asks, why couldn't I just text Rob or Becky for the password? And I think the answer is I don't think either one of you know the password either.
Not off the top of my head. I think Becky can probably get into the account, so we'll deputize her next time we do this. This was not, as usual with us. It's not exactly always the best, most well planned out show beforehand.
Yep, and so we're kind of just running with this. So Bill to Spill, who has changed his name to Grammy Award-winning baritone J. Cougar Colleen Camp, first appreciates everything JL does with the shout-outs. It does not go unnoticed. And second, one shocking prediction for this offseason.
Shocking prediction.
Oh, I got one. This one actually is kind of. I think maybe it won't be Trouba that gets moved. Definitely won't be Zibanejad or Panarin. Chris Kreider gets traded by Chris Drury this summer.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
I mean, certainly you could get a haul. And again, I don't want to.
Yeah.
We'll do more speculative stuff, especially after the draft and free agency, and we'll kind of get into that. But I'll go along those lines, Nick. I was going to name another random player, not random, but one that I think could or should be in play for the right return is Keandre Miller.
I like that.
He too could be moved. Not that I want him to be moved. I think he's got more to give. I think he'll be better in his second year in Laviolette's system, especially if he's away from Trouba. But certainly if Chris Drury's taking calls and making calls, his name will be out there.
All right. I got one for you guys. To the New York Rangers, Clayton Kershaw Keller
Oh, God.
in exchange for Capo Caco and Ryan Lindgren, with varying pieces to balance that. But that's
I'll tell you, that would definitely be a bold move for sure, especially with Utah saying that they're looking to come in hot and spend money. So that one would actually really shock me.
We said bold. And Keller has been on the Rangers' radar for the last 7 years. The Rangers almost had him. That was the
Ryan McDonough to Edmonton deal, right?
Where they had McDonough to Edmonton for the 4th overall to take Keller. But then the PLD went to Columbus and Edmonton to Puljujarvi, and that was the end of it.
Right. Wow.
That's
that would
mine.
be interesting. I like it. All right.
All right. Sorry, Nick, I cut you off if you wanted to say something else.
No, that is very bold. Like I would be genuinely surprised if Utah did that, because they, in my opinion, this is just one man's opinion, they would be getting absolutely fleeced. That would be some way to start a new franchise.
So here's my take on it for Utah. First, if you look at their cap-friendly page, they have no defensemen signed. They have 3 RFAs, Jersey, Moser, and Valimaki, none of them fit the Lindgren mold of stay at home, defensively solid, tough. They don't have that, and they need that. Second, Keller's a big money guy. They may not want to start with that big money guy. They understand he's probably their entire offense. And third, Kako, they could be buying low. I think the Rangers need to add a little bit to it. It's not an exact science, but I wanted to go that one. So, next question. Michael Silvers, and Silvers 1979. Again, thank you for the support on Patreon and everything. Really appreciate it. That does not go unnoticed. Moments from this season. What was your highest of the highs and the lowest of the lows?
I mean, I want to stay away from saying the lowest of the low was Game 6, obviously losing, because that's the easiest answer. The highest of the highs. I mean, the Chris Kreider hat trick is just it's really the one thing we'll always remember, right? That's kind of this run's Derek Stepan Game 7 overtime moment, right? So from 2015, everybody remembers Derek Stepan, the Game 7 OT winner against Washington in the second round. This year, again, this is like, it's so funny and ironic and not funny at all how this season turned into a 2015 redux. This season's second round moment was the Kreider hat trick. I mean, to me, that's also just classic, like, we're going to fucking win the Stanley Cup. Like, you cannot watch that game and bask in the glow afterwards and think any differently. I'm not going to say Game 6 for a low. I mean, I don't know. There were some pretty ugly losses.
The Heedle injury, the Fox injury.
Yeah.
The Igor going through whatever the hell he went through in January. Yeah. There's a lot there.
Yeah. No, that's true. That's true. Maybe, honestly, you know what, thinking back on it, and again, it's in the playoffs, so I apologize. I don't mean to ignore the 82, because I like to be one. I am one who values that, but man, like the Nick Jensen crashing into Fox's knee, just, and the repercussions that had, the reverberations that now has, right, throughout the rest of the playoff run, like that seems like the point where everything really changed, even though we didn't know it at the time. But yeah, I don't know. I don't have a great answer for that low point.
Highest of highs for me, I would love to say Kreider's Game 6, but that kind of rings hollow for me now, because it would mean even more if we went on to finish the story. So that one's going to take a backseat for me. I'm going to say the Stadium Series. Getting to go to that game and experiencing everything that goes into an outdoor game, and then B, the Rangers come back in that game, and of course it was against the Islanders. Super sweet, super awesome. Really glad that I was able to take that in. Low, either Heedle getting hurt against Carolina, which completely changed the complexion of the season, or Nick Jensen knee on knee with Fox. Or, I mean, honestly, now knowing that we know that Trouba played on one leg too, I'm going to say the lowest of the low is the Ranger training staff for letting a guy go out there with a broken ankle.
All right. I'm going to start with my lowest, which, Rob, I texted you that Game 6 in Carolina before Kreider took over broke me.
Yes,
that was my low.
Yeah.
I said, they're done. I can't believe they're going to blow this. And they broke me. That was my low. My highest of the highs is completely unrelated to anything the Rangers did, but when we started getting primetime games on weekends, and I'd have them on the TV, and my oldest would sit, she's going to be 3, she would sit, point at the TV, go, hockey with daddy, and she'd sit and she'd watch an entire game with me. That was amazing. And I know it's not an answer that probably people are looking for, but that was just absolutely amazing.
It's really cool when the kids start, getting into it. Our daughter too, she hasn't really watched too many games, some day games and stuff. And she's not really paying attention the whole time, but she's got some Rangers gear and she knows some of the players. We brought home a program from one of the games we went to, and she like loves flipping through it and like naming all the players. She like knows a lot of their faces now. So it is awesome when the kids get involved. It reminds you why you do this in the first place, because God knows, guys, like I've had plenty of moments the last week where I've been like, why do I put so much time and energy and emotional investment into this? Like, what do I really get out of it? And it's that stuff. It's connecting with the people around you. It's the memories. It's all that stuff. So I love that answer, Dave. And,
Thank you.
Screw anybody who doesn't like it.
All right. So Becky at BHabs37 writes, am I doxing Rob as the admin of the Live from the Blue Sheets Twitter account? Yes. Yes, I am.
Yes. It's not always me. It's a shared responsibility. You can usually tell when she's tweeting versus when I'm tweeting, but yeah.
Yep. All right. We got two more. Ranger Mike at Ranger Mike 2024. With a lot of people saying that playoff hockey requires forwards with grit and strength and not just skill, are the Rangers destined to trade away smaller players like Zibanejad and Panarin in order to take the next step in the playoffs, aka winning a Stanley Cup?
Okay, well,
go ahead, Rob.
Go ahead. Yeah. Well, no, yeah. So this is what's so frustrating about this is that, and about him, is that Mika Zibanejad's not small. He's listed at 6'2", 210 pounds. He is not a small player. He plays small, and that is his problem. And it's not that even that he's like a finesse player, but like he just does not play that heavy game, right? That's just the best way to say it. It's kind of a know it when you see it thing, but he's not small. So let's not be, let's not be incorrect here. Panarin is on the smaller side, but I honestly was happy with his battle level throughout the playoffs. His name has not come up that much in this podcast, and I think that's for a reason. Even though he did not reach the lofty points per game rate that we saw during the regular season, his line was constantly creating chances. His presence was opening lanes up for Trocheck and Lafreniere. He scored 4 game-winning goals. The goals that he scored were all game winners. He's another guy though that I think the way you put it, Nick, before is accurate. Like you can't necessarily rely on him to like carry you to a cup, but can he be a contributor? Will he be a contributor if they do it? Absolutely. I don't know. I'm not as down on him as a lot of people are. And I do get the sense that he's certainly not bearing as much criticism as he was 2 seasons ago, or especially last season. To the question though, just really quickly, I do think there is a needed stylistic element that has to come from outside the organization. Because even, you brought up Osman and Berard earlier, Dave. I would love that. And I think they both will get looks next year. But if this team is serious about winning or going for another Stanley Cup next year, you're not going to do it with 2 rookies, most likely. It's just not the way things happen in the NHL, right? So more than likely, you're going to need to import some of that. And they have to be able to be guys who can also contribute on the score sheet and, score important goals. Sam Bennett's a great example of that style of player. Even like, I hate to use this example, but like Pat Maroon on the Tampa teams and St. Louis before that, like, you just need a little bit more of that element. And I think if you add that to the current core, right, you change a couple of key pieces, you're probably closer to the mark.
Yeah, that's kind of honestly why in my head, and I know it's not a popular answer, I could see Drury looking to move Kreider, because out of all the guys right now that are movable, his no move clause becomes a 15-team no trade on July 1st. So you have that. He's only making 6 and change. So for a guy who's, the last couple of years been lighting it up and has a 50-goal season under his belt, teams would be drooling over that. And I think look, you can replace wingers. Wingers are easier to replace than centers. So that's why I don't think Zibanejad's going anywhere. And because I think this team needs that guy who has that sandpaper to his game. Look, I think Kreider can play physically, but I don't My question with him has always been his motor. Does he want to do it every single night?
Right.
And I think that's one of those things where I think that's where Drury might look to move him for a guy on a Sam Bennett type, or not Matthew Tkachuk, because you're not getting Matthew Tkachuk, but a Matthew Tkachuk-esque winger that will drag his line mates into battle. So
Well, right, and then and just sorry not to cut you off, but is it like do you make that move and you bring in some real quality pieces, and then that also frees up cap space to like make a run at Reinhart, right, or someone in free agency, because you've got all sorts of cap space at that point.
Oh, 100%. Like, I mean, my ideal free agent, I want Jonathan Marchessault. That's where I'm at. If he makes it a free agent, that's my guy. That's who I want the Rangers to get, because that solves your top line right wing issue right then and there. So, I mean, if we're talking about an ideal offseason, that would be it. But I don't think Zibanejad and Panarin get moved. I do think it's a name that would really set. And I mean, look, if we want to talk about really sending shockwaves throughout the locker room, if you move Chris Kreider, that's going to resound pretty loudly everywhere.
Yeah, well, I don't think they move Kreider, though. As the only quote-unquote big guy that gets to the net, I don't think they're going to move him. Now, I just wanted to bring up some food for thought. I don't think they're going to move Panarin or Zibanejad. I think the moves they're going to make are from the depth. I do agree they're missing that bite element. They don't have that. Panarin, though, his contract, they're heading into free agency. On July 1st, he gets a $9 million signing bonus. And then due for the rest of the contract, 2 seasons, he's only due $9 million for $11.6 million in cap hit for the next 2 seasons.
Right.
It's a full no move, but that's a contract that a lot of teams would like. Panarin does have trade value. I don't think they do it. I don't think the idea of needing to have that extra element, not so much size, more strength and tenacity, I think they need it. I don't think it comes from Zibanejad or Panarin.
Yeah, agreed.
The last one is less of a question and more of a statement from Nick Barson at Barson Nick. It's just a sad crying emoji face. And Nick, we are with you.
Yeah, maybe that's the best way to wrap it up, right? Let's kind of talk about or just kind of close it out in terms of our our emotions, right? And put a bow on the season. I mean, part of the reason that I wanted to take a Twitter sort of hiatus was like, I got on the bus to go to work. I have about a 40-minute bus ride into Manhattan, and I honestly got depressed. Like, I pulled up Twitter, and it wasn't, look, Twitter can be a very toxic place, as we all know. But I wasn't getting, it wasn't a lot of bad interaction, or I wasn't seeing a bunch of, racism or anything like that. I was just like, man, I can't think about the Rangers right now. Like, I just can't do it. Like, and look, I'm happy to do the podcast, and I'm obviously going to keep track of the off season for sure. But I'm just like that sort of always on approach. And I was like, I just felt like I needed a big time detox from it, and just sports in general, right? I mean, look, I'm a Yankee fan. They're having a great season, no complaints there. But sitting down and getting super emotionally invested in a sporting event, which is all I've done for the last couple of months here, with the playoffs and a lot of this Ranger season. I mean, this is about as much as I've emotionally invested into one single season of sports in my life. And it's not that I didn't feel like it was rewarding, because I think there was plenty of good. And as I mentioned before, it's not just about, did your team win the championship? I think there's a lot of value and good things to come out of it. Like you mentioned, Dave, whether it's watching with your kids, or I get to go to games with my dad. It's something Becky and I can look forward to at night when the kids go to sleep. Like, all those things bring a lot of value to life, but and being a sports fan. But man, the emptiness I felt when they lost that game was unlike anything I've experienced in a very long time. The only other time I felt that way was 2015. Even after
Yep.
losing to the Kings, I was kind of like, all right, well, really good run, and they were right there, and I expected them to get back a couple of times and have a few more shots at it. When they lost in 15, it was completely different. Excuse me. And I actually didn't feel like they were going to get back again for a while. And they didn't get back to the conference final, obviously, until 22. I don't quite have that feeling. I think this team is more than capable of getting right back next year or the year after. But the emptiness emotionally was striking for me. So, yeah, like you said to the questioner, crying emoji, sad faces, all that stuff, certainly characterizing the way I'm feeling. And I'll miss the team because I really did enjoy watching this team over the course of the year. It was a fun team to watch. It was a fun team to root for. I love Laviolette as a coach. He might be my favorite coach they've had, kind of, in a very long time, probably since Torts, and Torts was more about entertainment value than anything. So that's good stuff, and that's a positive way for me to close it out, I'll say.
Yeah,
I got
I
nothing
just,
else to add.
oh, no, I think you encapsulated it pretty well. I mean, it's just, for me, it's sadness, it's anger, I just look at it as kind of like 2015. It's a year that got away.
Yeah.
Especially because like, I think Florida is pretty much going to steamroll Edmonton, and
Me too.
it's just like, if that happens, I'm just going to be like, God, that could have been us. Like, I mean, the same feeling I had in 15, where I watched the Blackhawks and I'm like, God, we could have beaten that team if we were healthy. We were better than them that year. Like, there was no doubt. I kept thinking, I'm like, if we beat Tampa, we're winning the cup. There's no doubt. Same feeling I had this year. We beat Florida, we're winning the cup. And I just, like, when we lost to LA, I was like, okay, the better team won. I'm not really mad. I mean, we got a lot of bounces that went our way, and when the bounces stop going, that's, when you're not a better team, this is what's going to happen. So, like, losing to LA, there was no issue. But man, because this one, I just feel like it just feels like it's history repeating itself again, with us wasting another amazing effort by our goalie. Just change the nameplate, but the story's still the same. And it's just like, it was right there. So there's a lot of anger. There's a lot of sadness because, I mean, if we're really following history, then next year we're going to take a big step back and we're going to lose in 5 games in the first round. So it's just one of those things. You're not guaranteed to ever get back to this point again. So just feeling like you didn't squeeze every bit of juice out of the orange is a real kick in the nuts.
Yeah, and also, sorry, and yeah, I know we're not going to go too much longer here, but even the way that this playoffs played out, right, with the sweep and then beating Carolina in 6 and having all that time off, just the way the schedule lined up, you were like, wow, that you don't even have the like, oh, well, they were out of gas thing, which you had in 2012, you had in 2015 to some extent because they had played a grueling 7-game series before that, before Tampa, and then especially in 22, we know they were out of gas. That especially that game 6. I mean, nobody could skate that entire final game against Tampa two seasons ago. That's not what happened here. They just got soundly destroyed by a better team. And that's tough to take because in a way, it's unexpected, right? I think if you told me 6 or 8 weeks ago, like, hey, look, like the Rangers are good, but like they're not better than Florida and it's pretty decisive, I would have said, no, like that'll be close. And the game, and yeah, sure, the scores were close, but like if you look at the balance of play, especially 5-on-5, Florida destroyed them, and the power play went cold as well. And that was a huge thing as well. That, look, these are all things that we'll talk about over the summer that the Rangers absolutely need to address. It's the one thing I'm waiting for is to hear from Chris Drury. I think he's going to deliver remarks on Thursday or Friday this week. I don't know how much detail he'll go into, but certainly this organization needs to figure out how to match and exceed the intensity and the, however you said it earlier, Dave, kind of the tenacity and the strength of an opponent like Florida in a conference final. Because if they don't do that, they're not going to get past this round. It's going to be similar story to Carolina, who can't get past the second round. It'll be the Rangers version of that, where they can't get past the third round. So Like I said, lots to talk about this summer. We're gonna do draft stuff as that approaches towards the end of the month. Certainly a show after free agency if the Rangers do make some significant moves. And because they went so deep, even though they didn't get there, it means it's a short off season. The team will be back on the ice in about 3 months anyway, getting ready for training camp. So as always, guys, it's been a pleasure. I want to thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.